All right, what's going on, everybody? Simple Sports back with another episode. Okay, I want to talk about Mr. Eli Manning, and the question I have, as a lot of people do, have had for a while, actually, for a couple of years, is he a Hall of Famer? So, before I get into that discussion, I do want to touch on a couple of quick things, really quick. First, and I'm not going to spend much time on any of these, but so today the NFL pledged to donate $100 million to the Players Coalition. I haven't read up on it. I was at work when the story broke, so I just kind of saw the headlines and social media and all that stuff. So I don't know any of the details other than the fact that they have agreed to do so. I was skimming through an article. Again, I didn't have time to actually read it and sit down and look things up. But I guess there's some sort of disagreement on part of it. I don't really know. It sounds like a good idea on the surface, but we'll see what comes of that. As I said, I'll read up on that some more and probably do another discussion on that in a later episode. But here's what I'll say. Just on the surface, I do like the fact that there's at least conversation and progress trying to be made. I always appreciate effort. A lot of things, sometimes effort means a lot more than the results. And I'm not saying that the effort is going to matter more than the results in this particular case, but sometimes just the effort alone can change the narrative of certain conversations. And I think this is one of those particular cases where you have people who are, ever since this thing started, you've had people all over the place on either side of the fence, and some people not even in the same ballpark as far as what the actual conversation should be. And so I think this is, and we've had a couple of these moments where, okay, so it first happened, it was explained, everyone was kind of on the same page. There were people that were pissed off, there were people that were okay with it, and then it got out of control, and then we had the whole Charlottesville thing, and I think that kind of grounded a couple of more people, and then it kind of got out of control again, and then we had, Trump has been saying things, and all these other people have been saying things, and all these different things have happened, and each time it sort of resets itself, and then we start over again. Excuse me. And I think this is a similar incident to that, where I think it's going to, if nothing else, it's going to sort of reset the conversation, I think, which I think is needed. So for that, I think it's a good idea. Again, I don't know all the details, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But I'll read up on that and see, how that goes. What else happened? So Michael Crabtree and Talib got suspended 2 games, reduced to 1 game. I'm perfectly fine with that. I think it's well deserved. It's not a good look, regardless of what you may think. I understand a lot of people are saying, no, you got to defend yourself and all that stuff, which I 100% agree with. My only take is you also have to understand the consequences of those actions. And in this particular case, this one is a little bit uglier than some of the previous incidents we've seen, especially considering that they sort of re-engaged after it was already kind of over with. I think the game is perfectly fine. They both deserve the game. Enough said on that. Let's see what else. So the college football rankings also came out. Top 10, I'm okay with it. I think everything will sort of settle, after all the dust settles. I think we'll get a solid answer on the top 4 teams. I think it's been set up in a way that, if nothing else, we'll at least get the best 4 teams out of what is currently available as far as what's in the top 10, 12. I think we'll at least get the best 4 teams out of that crop. I think the playoff system definitely needs some reworking. I don't think we need more than 4 teams. I think if you get more than 4 teams, you're going to start running into a lot of issues, as far as someone being left out or someone getting in that other people feel they shouldn't got in, and all those different situations. And to be fair, you're going to have that no matter what. If you increase it to 6 teams, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are going to think they should be in. If you go to 8 teams, 9 and 10 should they think they should be in, and it's a never-ending loop as far as that goes. So I think 4 teams is enough. If there were to be an increase, I think 6 would be the number, and you give 1 and 2 a bye, and then you play out the 4, and then you sort of resume after that, like they currently do. But outside, I think 6 should be the max. 5, if you want to do like the 5 conference champs and then a non-conference, I'm good with that. But my issue with the college football playoff rankings is the criteria or lack of criteria, or at least the lack of transparency as to what the criteria is. That's what I think the only problem with it is. I'm okay with the actual result and the system itself, but the how we got to that point, I think, needs to be reworked a little bit. I think it's okay. I think at the end of the day, you still get at least 2, maybe 3 of the best teams, but someone's always going to complain, so I don't think it needs to be tweaked too much because you're never going to make anyone happy. It is what it is. I will say, though, as an Ohio State fan, they're sitting at 8, and here's what I think. I think they have a shot to get in because I think Clemson's going to win. I think Oklahoma's going to win, and I think that I don't know between Georgia and Auburn. I'd like to think Auburn is going to win, but I don't really know. That one's, for me, is a little bit of a toss-up. Either way, the winner of that game is going to be in. So you're going to have 3 spots. Again, assuming Clemson wins, assuming Oklahoma wins, and then the winner, Auburn and Georgia. We'll see. But so your 3 spots are taken, and then you have essentially the Big Ten winner or Auburn as your 4th spot, if it plays out that way. Now, if certain teams lose, things like that, if Clemson loses or Oklahoma loses, or or if they both lose, or all 3, whatever, like, then you're going to have a real wrench in the system, and it's going to really go into chaos. But I don't foresee that happening. So given the situation I just laid out, here's what I think as far as should Ohio State get in, assuming they win, or should Bama get in. My take on it is it's really going to depend on who you ask. For me personally, I think Ohio State should get in, and it's not because I'm a fan, but I think they have a couple of different arguments to make if they were to win, whereas Alabama really only has one for me. And for Bama, it's, well, we only have 1 loss, which is fair. That's a fair, it's a fair statement. You can look at their strength of schedule, and it's not good. The team itself is not nearly as good as you would expect the Bama team to be. But setting all that aside, yes, they only have 1 loss, and it came to a really, really good team. So that's their argument. Ohio State, albeit they had 2 ugly losses, one not as ugly as the Iowa loss, the Oklahoma loss, still an ugly loss, but definitely not as bad. If they had lost to just Oklahoma and had beaten Iowa, we wouldn't even be having this conversation at all. The conversation would then be, well, if Ohio State loses, then Bama's in, most likely, I would assume. But we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out. Anyway, point being, so Ohio State, for me, as I said, Bama has that one argument as far as having 1 loss. For me, Ohio State has a few different things in their favor. One, the strength of schedule is actually really good. A lot of people seem to think that they don't have a good strength of schedule, and I think those people are strictly just haters of Ohio State, which there are a lot of. There are a lot of people that just simply don't like Ohio State, and hey, I don't knock anyone for their opinions. It is what it is. But they have a really good strength of schedule. I think they're in the top 10. They have a couple of really good wins. They do have a couple of bad losses, as I already mentioned, but they do have some really quality wins. And the biggest thing is, first of all, it's not like Bama's a 1-loss team and Ohio State's a 3-loss team. They lost 2 games, but they're also going to play for the championship, the conference championship, Big Ten championship, and Bama's idle until things start happening next week. that's in Ohio State's favor. I personally think Ohio State should get in, but only if they beat Wisconsin pretty soundly. And I think soundly is, 10 to 14 points. Wisconsin is a good team. I've watched them. They're really, really good. I think if they can beat them by 10, maybe more than that, I think they should get in. And obviously we'll see how the game actually looks, as far as the eye test, whether or not they actually dominate the game. Maybe they get a couple of bad breaks and the score is a little bit closer than it probably should have been. Or if they just flat out roll Wisconsin, I think they should be in. Like if it's, something like, and I said this in my last video, but something like 42-20, something like that, 35-10, 35-14, whatever, something along those lines, I think they should be in. Again, not coming from me as a fan, but me as purely being objective, because it's going to come down to those teams. If there was someone else who were sort of in the mix, then I'd be a lot more, I'd lean a lot more towards them. But the thing is, the teams at the top of the list right now, they're going to play each other. So a lot of these guys are going to fall off the map no matter what. You have, Clemson plays Miami, I believe. Yeah. So Clemson will play Miami. Oklahoma plays TCU. Wisconsin plays Ohio State. Auburn, Georgia. All of those teams are in the top 10. So regardless of what happens one way or the other for any of these teams, there's going to be a lot of shuffling in the next rankings, even if it's the same top 10, just for assumption's sake, or just for, I don't know, whatever. Even if the same top 10 teams remain in the top 10, there's still going to be a lot of shuffling. And so Clemson wins, Miami will then drop. If Auburn wins, Georgia will drop. And I think that's what needs to happen. I think Auburn needs to win. Georgia drops, Miami drops, so they'll move up to 6. And then they beat Wisconsin, so Wisconsin is going to drop. So let's say, for argument's sake, they move up to 5. So you have Clemson, Oklahoma, Auburn at 3, Bama at 4, Ohio State at 5. And I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I'm just saying, based on the wins and losses, if you were to just simply remove the teams that lost and shuffle everybody else up, that's what it would look like. Clemson, Oklahoma, Auburn at 3, Bama at 4, Ohio State at 5. And that's where you get the discussion is basically Bama's resume versus Ohio State's resume. And I think given if they beat Wisconsin pretty soundly versus Bama not having a good strength of schedule and not playing in the conference title game, I think they deserve to get in just based on that alone. Do I think they actually both deserve to be in? No, I don't think either one should be in, but one of them is going to get in. And unless it's, obviously unless Wisconsin wins, and none of it matters anyway. But assuming they lose to Ohio State, one of them is going to get in, Bama or Ohio State. And based on the resume, based on the conference title, I think that'll be the major tiebreaker, is the fact that they have the Big Ten title. They're going to get in. So we'll see how it shakes up. Either way, there's a bunch of really good games coming up this weekend, and I'm pretty pumped to watch them all. So we'll see how it shakes up. Now, I do want to talk about Eli Manning really quickly. So Eli Manning, whether he plays for 2 or 3, 4 more years, or he retires, or whatever the case may be, his career is coming to a close. And the question, the long, I guess, debated question is he elite? It started off as, is he elite? And then he won 2 Super Bowls, and people kind of let that one be, which kind of confused me. And then it became, is he a Hall of Famer? And I'm going to answer that question. And let me just, first of all, let me just give you my overall answer. And I say yes, he's a Hall of Famer. But I do want to talk about why really quickly. And I do want to talk about the negatives and the positives on both. Because I do think there's a very valid argument that he shouldn't be. I'm just going to make the case that he should be. I don't think that, I think if you were to leave him out, I don't necessarily think you would be wrong per se. I just think, I personally think he should be in. That's just me. But let's talk about it. So why, first of all, and I pulled some of this, I was reading a couple of articles from a couple of different people, a guy named Michael Hurley from CBS. And then another guy from Fox that I couldn't track down his name on the article, but it was a guy that wrote this on Fox Sports. So a couple of points I pulled from them that I agreed with, and then a couple of them I just want to talk about really quickly. So let's just quickly go over a few positives and negatives. I don't care about his numbers per se. For me, stats are sometimes overrated. I like winners. That's me. And people that have followed me, that know me personally, they know I like stats, but I think stats are supplemental, and because they can be manipulated to make any argument you want. It is what it is. For example, even in Eli Manning's case, Eli Manning has a better like, for example, he has more touchdowns, more passing yards, more, a higher completion percentage than a lot of, well-known historical quarterbacks. But if you were to put them next to each other, like say in a draft, would you take him over a Drew Brees or Dan Marino or Brett Favre? No, I wouldn't. So stats to me, I think are supplemental, but I don't think they tell all. So I'm going to sort of avoid, I'm going to throw out a few, but I'm going to, for the most part, avoid stats. So here we go. First, let's go over the positive stuff. And let's just look at a few where he places in history. In passes completed, he's 6th all time. Passing yards, 7th. Passing touchdowns, he's tied for 7th. In NFL history, I mean, that's pretty good. And for me personally, if you wanted to end the argument right there, I think that if you were to tell me no face, no name, nothing like that, if you were to say, hey, here's a guy that's eligible for the Hall of Fame, he's a 2-time Super Bowl champ, and he finished 6th in passes completed, passing yards, he's 7th, and in passing touchdowns, he's 7th. Would you put him in the Hall of Fame just based on that alone? I say yes. If you're telling me in the history of the entire NFL, he's in the top 10 in 3 major categories and a 2-time Super Bowl champ, he's in. And some of the people that are in front of him on that list, it's not like they're scrubs, okay? You have Brett Favre, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Dan Marino, John Elway, Frank Tarkenton, who I didn't get to see play personally, but I've read stories, I've watched, people talk about him. Fair enough. You want to put him in there, cool. I don't know anything about him. And a lot of them were either locks or at least thought to be locks to be first ballot Hall of Famers when they were eligible or are eligible. In the case of a couple of those, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, etc. It sounds like a Hall of Fame quarterback to me. I think that's enough. Again, stats, whatever. And a question that I don't remember who said it, where I heard it first. It might have been Colin Cowherd. I don't remember exactly. But he said he was talking about Kentucky and John Calipari and Kentucky and all that stuff. And he was basically asking the question, could you tell the story, if you want to relay the history of college basketball as a story, could you tell that story without, I don't remember exactly who or what it was, but Kentucky basketball or John Calipari or a certain player or whoever, could you tell the NFL story without talking about Eli Manning and the Giants on that miraculous run they had the first go-around where they went on the road for every game and then beat an undefeated Patriots team in one of the best, if not the best, Super Bowl of all time? Actually, it's in the top 5. I think last year's was the best for me personally, but whatever. Point being, you can't tell the NFL story without that. That's one of the most historic moments, not just in NFL, but in sports. You have a team who is literally, I think they were 9-7 when they made the playoff and went on the road and beat every team, and then they went in and beat a undefeated Patriots team. You can't tell the story of the NFL. You can't tell the story in sports without bringing that up. Like, that is a significant part of sports history. The Giants beat the Bucks that year, and then they beat who did they beat after that? The Cowboys. NFC Championship, they beat the Packers in overtime. And that's another thing. It's like, Eli Manning, they went on the road, but they went on the road to tough places to play, albeit Tampa Bay, man. But Green Bay for the NFC Championship in Green Bay. So you know it's freezing, miserable temperatures, miserable atmosphere to be playing in. And then they go up and beat the undefeated Patriots. And that's just the first Super Bowl. The second Super Bowl also consisted of him making one of the most, both of them did actually. You had the David Tyree catch in the first one. And you could say it was luck. It is what it is. There's a lot of luck. There has to be luck involved at some point for anyone. So I don't care about luck. I don't care about Andrew Luck either, but that's neither here nor there. Just wanted to take a shot at him because he plays for the Colts. So felt like that was a good opportunity. Anyway, the second one, he made one of the best throws I've ever seen to Manningham. Like, that ball was perfect. And that was another great game. They probably should have lost that one if that ball wasn't perfect, and B, if Welker didn't drop that pass from Brady. They iced that game there, and, it's all over with. But again, you can't tell the NFL story without those two playoff runs, and they were led by one Eli Manning. So those are the positive things. Now, there are some negatives, as with every case. He has led the NFL in interceptions for 3 separate years, and posted passer ratings of 85 or lower in 6 of his 14 seasons, which is pretty poor. Again, I never said he's elite. I don't think anyone would confuse him for being this all-time great quarterback, top 5, top 10 even. But I don't think you can tell the story of the NFL without Eli Manning. And I think he's a great quarterback. I don't think he's an all-time great quarterback. Like, for example, in the NBA, they always say superstars and stars. LeBron James is a superstar. Right now, Giannis, he's a star. He's up and coming, but he's a star right now. And I think Eli's the same way. I think Eli was a star. I don't think he's a superstar. But if Giannis goes on to have an absolutely phenomenal career, and maybe, let's say he wins 1 championship, like, are you going to consider him any less of a player? I wouldn't. But again, that's just me. That's my take on it. Another quote from Mr. Hurley, and I'm just going to read this one off. What's interesting about Eli Manning is that aside from 2 Super Bowl winning seasons, he's never won another playoff game. Now, that was a stat that I actually didn't know. I thought that he had won a couple, 2 or 3. That's a pretty alarming statistic. Out of 14 seasons, he won 2 Super Bowls, and in those 2 Super Bowls, outside of those 2 playoff runs, he hasn't won a single. So essentially, in 12 years, he hadn't won a single playoff game. That's pretty alarming. He's 0-4 as a postseason starting quarterback outside of those 2 years. So 4 times he went to the playoffs. So that's another alarming statistic. He went to the playoffs 6 times, and 6 times out of 14 years, and 4 of those times he got nothing. And in those 4 games, he threw 3 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, 54.2% of his passes completed, and ties for 21st with Matt Hasselbeck and Matt Ryan in total playoff touchdown passes. He's tied for 16th all time with Peyton Manning in career postseason passer rating at 87.4. which is lower than non-Hall of Famers Mark Sanchez, Tony Romo, and Joe Theismann. So this is a situation for me where you can manipulate stats to do what you want to do. Does anyone actually care that he has a lower passer rating than Mark Sanchez and Tony Romo? No. First of all, you didn't know that until I told you, and you didn't care either way. Because if you cared, you would have found out for yourself. The other thing is, that's a perfect example of someone using a statistic to further their agenda, which, again, fine, totally fine. I understand that's the way it works. But you wouldn't, if I would have told you he had a 87.4 passer rating, you would have said, okay, that's Eli Manning. But it's worse because you attach the names Mark Sanchez and Tony Romo, and you're like, oh, well, I don't consider them Hall of Famers, so why should I consider Eli Manning? So that's one of the pet peeves of mine in this whole industry that I'm learning and have learned over the last couple of years is I don't like stats. Not when they're used for that. I like stats to be supplemental, and for me, that's a bit much. Here's why I think he's going to get in. First of all, he is a Manning, and his brother's Peyton Manning, and he has the same number of rings as Peyton Manning. He's a Manning. He's pure, like, you've never had any issues. Like, he's been a saint as far as on the field, off the field, in the locker room, practice, in the facility. You've never heard a negative thing about him. The only thing that was negative I heard was the whole autograph thing, which I did not care about one bit. That's the only thing. And again, I don't think anyone's going to confuse him with this all-time great quarterback. But he had 2 historic playoff runs, and he won 2 Super Bowls, and you can't ignore that. Just because you don't like him or you don't think he's an elite player, you can't ignore that fact. And as a quote from Eli Manning, it doesn't have to make sense, or you don't have to make sense of it. It is what it is. And I think that's exactly what it is. I think he's going to get in. I think it's, I don't want to say a no-brainer, but I think based on what I've seen, based on what I know, and based on, like I said, being able to tell the story of the NFL, I don't think you can do so without talking about Eli Manning and those 2 Super Bowl runs. And for that reason, I think he's in. And another quote from Mr. Hurley, it's about the belief that many have that a true Hall of Famer or true Hall of Fame quarterback should be able to elevate the play of those around him to the point where they are at least competitive. Manning has shown in recent years that he's not able to do that and is on his way to a historically bad season with the Giants in 2017, which I totally agree with. Here's my thing on it, though. How much of it is Eli Manning hitting the wall, and how much of it is the circumstances as far as the organization? He lost all of his receivers, right? He literally lost 1 through 3 on his depth chart at receiver. It's hard to, I don't care who you are. Even a lot of people knock the receivers Aaron Rodgers has, right? Take it for what it is, whether you think they're good or not. Let's say Randall Cobb, Devontae Adams, and Jordy Nelson were all out for the year. Like, do you, at that point, even as great as Aaron Rodgers is, do you really expect him to be an elite quarterback like what we know him to be? No. The only one that seems to be able to overcome that is Tom Brady, because Tom Brady lost Edelman. He loses Gronk every year. He lost Edelman. He lost Amendola a bunch of times. He lost Chris Hogan. He lost a while back, a long time ago, he lost Aaron Hernandez, rest in peace. So he seems to be the only one that seems to be able to overcome that type of adversity. But even still, if he this year lost Brandon Cooks and Gronk and, let's say, Danny Amendola for the rest of the year, would you expect him? I wouldn't expect him to go. I wouldn't expect him to win a playoff game, given that. But so that's what Eli was up against. So again, my point is, how much of it is Eli falling off the wall, falling off the cliff, and how much of it is the Giants' circumstances, coaching, personnel, their record being what it is, they kind of giving up on the season? Like, how much of that goes into him hitting the wall? I think it'd be interesting to see, depending on where he goes next year. If he goes to a place like Jacksonville, who has a top 5 defense easily, a very fresh young running back, and some decent weapons on the outside, or like a Denver Broncos, who literally have the exact same situation, a great defense, a couple of good weapons on the outside, and a solid running game. Who knows what he could do in a situation like that? But again, he's not going to elevate it, which is why I think those teams come to mind. Teams that are sort of a quarterback away, and we say that all the time. They're a quarterback away. They're a quarterback away. Houston, for example, was a quarterback away, and they really looked to be like that when Deshaun Watson came in. They were rolling people. But then Deshaun Watson left. Everything's been in disarray since then. Well, he didn't leave. He got hurt, but you get my point. So we'll see how Eli does next year. I honestly like Eli. I've always had a soft spot for Eli because, again, I like winners, and I think he got a little bit of a bad rap just because he's not this all-time great quarterback. I don't think you need to be. Matt Ryan's not an all-time great quarterback, and he was a couple of run plays and not losing that fumble away from winning a Super Bowl. Okay? You don't win these things by accident. Okay? Matt Ryan doesn't get there by accident. Does that mean he's elite and this all-time great player? No. But there's certain things you just don't do by accident. Trent Dilfer. A lot of people give him slack because obviously that Ravens defense was phenomenal. But you still don't win the Super Bowl without at least a competent quarterback. Again, doesn't have to be an all-time great. He has to be competent. And for Eli Manning to go out and win 2 Super Bowls against the Patriots, who had great teams, one of them being 18-0, that's not easy to do. I know he had a great running game. I know he had a great defense. I know he had a lot of those things. You still don't do it by accident, okay? Sure, there's some luck involved, the Tyree play, the Welker drop, the Manningham throw. But he still, once that catch was made by David Tyree, everything that happened previously didn't matter. He still had to go down and score a touchdown, and he did on the biggest stage. Enough said for me. At the end of the day, I think he is a 2-time Super Bowl champ who, quite honestly, given where he is, could rank in the top 5 in a lot of major quarterback categories as far as stats go. I don't see how he doesn't get in. That makes no sense to me. People want to make the argument that he's not an elite quarterback, which, again, I think that's fine, but that is a totally separate discussion from is he a Hall of Famer. That's my take on it. Do have a couple of things I want to mention really quick that I thought about, one of which being winning streaks, okay? I don't understand the glory of behind a win streak, and here's why. Again, and what made me think of this was the Patriots, 18-0. Who cares? They won 18 straight games. And the one that they needed to win, they didn't win. They went 18-1. Now, I think winning streaks are great after it's done, and it's great to look back on. But in the moment, it doesn't. Who cares about the winning streak? If you're thinking about the winning streak and not that game, sure, like each game is in and of itself, especially in NFL and football in general. In NBA, maybe a little bit different just because they play so often and 2 or 3 times a week and 82 games throughout the year. So a winning streak could be a little more meaningful in basketball, I think. But in football, you have a week, essentially, week to week, separation from each game. They are so separate. Now, if they went out, let's say they play 4 games every Sunday or, 4 games a week, something like that, then sure. In a sport like that, winning streak, I think, is obviously substantial, but I don't understand the fascination with the winning streaks in the NFL other than when it's over with. Like, I don't understand it in the moment. It doesn't make sense to me, right? If the Eagles, for example, lose their next game, does that make them a bad team? No. It's just they lost that game. They still have won 10 games. They're 10-2 at that point. I don't know. Maybe I'm out of my mind on that one, but it doesn't. I can't wrap my head around why people are so fascinated with win streaks. And the reason I sort of brought it up was the whole Cavs win streak versus the Celtics win streak. And it's like all of a sudden, the Cavs, what they won, 9 or 10 in a row? And now everyone wants to crown them as the best team in the East, which, for the record, I think ultimately they will prove to be the better team in the East. Although the more I watch Boston, I'm really impressed. At the same time, it's more of because I want to see them beat Cleveland just for the story's sake. But I do think they have a realistic shot. But my point is, they won, 16 or 17 straight? And everyone was impressed And it was like, oh, that's great. But they all talked about Cleveland. And now Cleveland's won 8 or 9 in a row. And all of a sudden, they're a couple of games above 500. And life's good. Everything's great. They're the best team again. Blah, 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 blah. Watching Nick Wright and Chris Carter every morning. And Nick is... I've never seen, listen, I have my players and my teams that I'm super loyal to. Like, for example, for me, Kobe Bryant, you couldn't tell me that LeBron James is better than Kobe Bryant, especially not in my personal life. Now, am I objective enough to understand the argument? Sure. But you can't tell me that Kobe's not better than LeBron because I think he is. And Nick Wright is, like, obsessed with LeBron James, to me, to a disturbing level. Him and Shannon Sharp. I don't get it. It's like the guy can do no wrong in their eyes. Doesn't matter what he does. He's right. Everyone else is wrong. And I guess that's just part of, being a sports fan. Like, again, Kobe did no wrong in my eyes, but, to a lot of people, he was terrible. It is what it is. I don't even know what I'm talking about at this point. I just started rambling. I'm supposed to finish with the Eli stuff. That made me go off on this tangent, which I do a lot, so forgive me. I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.